Alright YouTube, so we are back, of course, talking about some Final Fantasy VII Remake, and before we even hop into today's video, that CEDEC event we talked about that is going to have Hamaguchi and Katase is currently happening. I think it actually just recently finished, and Audrey is over on Twitter doing translations and stuff. If there's anything interesting from that, we might do a video tomorrow covering whatever's said there. Now, a bit of context before we hop into this. I have not played the hard mode for Final Fantasy VII Remake. I tried it out a while back whenever I first kind of beat the game. I ended up dying to the Scorpion Sentinel in the first chapter and then just kind of never tried it again. Now, at the time, my characters weren't level 50 yet. Like, Barrett and Cloud were still in their 30s or 40s or whatever you end the game on. However, I am right now playing through the game on hard mode finally. I am a couple chapters in. This is chapter 4. You'll see me finish it here in a minute. And the point of this context is I had not played the hard mode yet, so my knowledge on it wasn't that great. Like, I knew you could, max out your weapons cores. I knew that there was additional boss fights, like probably enjoying things like that, but I hadn't actually done it myself yet. But now, having played through it a little bit, it brought about the topic of today's video, which was that I wasn't aware that we could not max out all the weapons' cores, and that every weapon got 6 cores altogether. The main core, 5 sub-cores. It wasn't until recently that I learned that each character has multiple weapons that are missing 1 or 2 sub-cores. Now, by finishing the game on normal difficulty, I had noticed, of course, that there were sub-cores missing for, I think, all the weapons by the end of a normal playthrough. I had seen online that there was a 6th level, so I knew that we'd get at least 1 more weapon core, or 1 more sub-core, whatever you want to say. I just assumed that through hard mode, each weapon would get a max amount of cores. So seeing this for the first time, the first thing that comes to mind for me is, I gotta ask the question, well, why is it missing weapon cores? Where are those at? Why do these weapons not have as many as the others? Now, looking online, I see people talk about it, and they were saying that it's because, the later weapons you get in the game are, by default, stronger than the earlier weapons, like a base Buster Sword versus, a base Twin Saber or something like that. A Twin Saber would be better. That's just a random example. I don't know if that's actually the case. And I haven't looked into, the logistics of it, a base Iron Blade versus, a base Hard Edge, or, a max Nailbat versus a max Mithril Saber. You also gotta factor in, the abilities that each and every weapon gets, and each weapon has their own niche. The Nailbat's, base stats aren't that good, or even the overall stats aren't that good, but it's all about the critical hit with Nailbat, right? The Hard Edge, if you're trying to do a lot of physical damage, Mithril Saber for magic stuff. If you're trying to have a balanced weapon, you can use the Buster Sword. We're just using Cloud as an example for this. What's weird to me, too, is, they could have easily broken down, some of the abilities for the later weapons. Say there's a node that gives you, 16 attack. You could have easily broken that down into, 2 or 3 different nodes for other cores if you wanted the weapons to have other cores. To me, it feels like there's almost room for them to add another core to pretty much all the weapons. Now, the max amount of cores that you can have for any one weapon, as we previously discussed, is, of course, 6. Now, on this menu, it doesn't really look like there's room for, a 7th core up here, though you could maybe move this over to the left a little bit. You have this extra space, that extra space, and that could be enough for a 7th core. But if you hop on over to this menu instead, there is clearly a lot of extra space next to the list of cores for each and every weapon. And it does look like there's plenty of room if they wanted to add, a 7th and possibly even an 8th core to any of these weapons. Something else that we've never talked about here on the channel, mostly because we haven't really talked about the game itself, the mechanics and things. We mostly talk about the story and theories and things, is that every character is clearly missing a 7th weapon. And why I say clearly is because every single character has this shadow box 7th weapon. If you go to an earlier screenshot, you can see the list of weapons. These fill in as you get another weapon. But every single character is missing this bottom one. It's almost like they had plans for a 7th weapon, but didn't put it into the game, cut the 7th weapon for every single character, or have plans to add a 7th weapon at some time. We've talked a lot about the idea, the prospect of them adding some sort of expansion thing, if you want to call it that, or some sort of DLC to Remake to kind of hold us over while we're waiting for Part 2. And it just so happens that, not too long ago, as we've discussed quite a few times already, there are some new trademarks, Ever Crisis and the First Soldier. And as most of the community is in agreement on, it seems like the First Soldier will be something Sephiroth-centric. What should be happening after the ending of Remake, assuming we're following the same story as the original FF7, is us traveling to Calm and then the Calm flashback, which is a very Sephiroth-centric piece of story. We've also talked about, and this is before the trademarks even became a thing, was even in the conversation, the idea of some sort of DLC for Remake that kind of bridges the gap between the ending of Remake and the start of Remake Part 2, right? And what made the most sense was some sort of Calm flashback sort of DLC. Something else we point out here on the channel a few times when we're discussing Remake and DLC is, of course, Kingdom Hearts 3. It took almost a full year before that game got any sort of DLC. And of course, same thing with Remake. Remake's had nothing, right? It's been almost a year. We didn't even have any sort of updates for the game. There wasn't a day one patch. We had that one random small, 100 megabyte update that's probably something for PS5 related stuff. And something else that stood out immensely to me now that I'm getting back into playing Remake and kind of immerse myself into it is the very weird coincidence, if you want to even call it a coincidence, that every single character has a maximum weapon level of 6. The maximum amount of cores that you can have on any one weapon is 6, and every single character has a maximum of 6 weapons. There's almost like, you can almost see the writing in the stars, the writing on the wall of some sort of expansion or DLC for this game that adds in a 7th weapon level, a 7th core to some of the weapons, additional cores to others, and a 7th weapon to all the characters. There's just too much happening and too many things missing and too many weird coincidences for there not to be some sort of additional content for this game. You have the missing weapons, the missing weapon cores, you have the 1-year anniversary coming up, the lack of updates, the game expanding onto other platforms and other generations, and of course the recently public trademarks that are related to Final Fantasy VII. Like, there's just too much happening for there not to be something at some point. It's a bit of a different video for today, my dudes, more of like a discussion / speculation video, but I was just playing through the game and I noticed this and just had to talk about it. But of course I want to pass off to you guys. I'm over here starving to death, I'm losing my voice for recording. When it comes to a remake, do you think that at any point, the 1-year anniversary coming up and things like that, and these trademarks and all the other stuff we discussed within this video, do you think there's going to be any sort of DLC for part 1, or do you think they're just focusing on part 2? Either way, my dudes, that is the video. Hopefully you enjoyed. If you did, give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you guys are new and want to get more Final Fantasy VII Remake content. Turn on my notifications. Follow me on Twitter at dashingdavidYT. I'm my Discord. Links to my social networks are in the description. Into the outro. Later, guys.
Used to care what people thought, but now I care more, and nobody out here's got it figured out. So therefore, I've lost all hope of a happy ending, depending on whether or not it's worth it. So insecure, no one's perfect. We spend it with no shame. We blow that like Coltrane. We in here like Rogaine, or leave it like Cobain.